In today's episode, Alex and I share some resources for hard to find hardware and supplies. And later, you'll meet Leisa Collins. Leisa traveled across the United States creating paintings of old homes and buildings along the way. She turned that art into a beautiful book full of love and reverence for history and architecture. But first, I am Stacy Grinsfelder from Blake Hill House, and I am the host of True Tales from Old Houses. Hello, everyone. I have just returned from the live audience event at the Hudson Valley. However, since I recorded this episode before I left, and I do not own a time machine, let's just say it went great. It went fantastic. We all had so much fun. At this point, I have no reason to believe that isn't true. And time machine or not, it's never too early to thank Susan and Will Brinson for sharing their beautiful home with our True Tales from Old Houses audience. I'll have a blog post up this week with photos and some behind-the-scenes fun from the entire weekend. And the first episode from the Hudson Valley will drop on Monday, November 22nd. It features Daniel Cantor, who is always a delight, and the first face-to-face conversation between Devin Caldwell and I. If you just jumped into this show during the last 2 seasons, Devin was my co-host for over 30 episodes, and yet we never met in person. Our partnership was a very modern Skype and Zoom-based relationship, but he's about to find out that I'm a hugger, and we'll see how well that goes over. Now, I have one more announcement about the merch. During the last episode, I talked about the very short merch run plan for November 1st through the 12th. Well, if you have been on the True Tales from Old Houses website looking for the pre-order info, you already know that there was a hitch with the original plan. If not, here's the deal. Due to supply chain issues, and frankly, if I never hear the phrase supply chain issues again, that will be fine by me. Anyway, due to that problem, we are not able to do pre-orders. I get all of my True Tales from Old Houses merch through a local business, and I work closely with my buddy Jim to get really nice, high-quality gear. After a few conversations, we realized that if we did pre-orders, there would be no guarantee that the items you ordered would be available when I submitted everything at once because the supply chain is broken right now. So we switched gears, and now we'll have an in-stock store with a limited amount of inventory. So basically, when each item sells out, or size, whatnot, I won't be restocking for a while, but I guess we'll just play it by ear. And actually, this is better because what you'll see on the True Tales from Old Houses website will be available and ready to ship immediately, which means less waiting. Currently, everything is on the way to me, so it's a done deal. I ordered new colors for the hoodies, there's a new t-shirt style, more work aprons, and by popular request, there'll be stickers too. I'll announce when the shop is stocked here on the show, of course, but for the most up-to-date info, I'll post the details in the True Tales from Old Houses Facebook group and on Instagram too. If you're not a social media user, I'll also send a heads up when the shop is stocked in our email newsletter, which you may sign up for at truetalesfromoldhouses.com. In the meantime, there is a preview of everything that will be available over on the website now. Thank you all for being so flexible. We're not saving lives here. Life just is what it is right now. For today's Q&A, Alex from Old Town Home is back. Hello, Alex.
Hey, Stacy. Glad to be back.
Yeah, well, are you ready for today's question?
I am absolutely ready. This is a question that is near and dear to my heart, and I really enjoy. It's what probably inspired me to get into restoring old houses.
Excellent. We'll hit on it more, but I think I know why. The question for today is, how do you source hard-to-find supplies specific to old houses?
There's no good one answer. That's the best part about this one.
Right. And I was going to say, from compatible paints to period-appropriate hardware, sourcing these supplies can be a challenge. I don't know. At least in the beginning. Everything seems really overwhelming in the beginning.
Exactly. And that's the thing that we didn't have any understanding when we bought our house, that it wasn't just a case of, well, we'll go down to Home Depot or Lowe's or some other big box around the area and be able to pick up the right materials for our house. It's just, they're not readily available because it's not mass market. But as much as they're not readily available at your big box store, they're definitely available at many different places around you and online. So you just need to know where to look.
Right. So why don't you, how do you find things specifically? I don't know. Pick a few things that you find in certain ways.
Okay. So really, you have to look at the type of material that you're looking for. You're looking for something that's architectural salvage. So are we talking about period appropriate locks or hinges or something along those lines? Or are you looking at more materials like old wood or salvage glass or something along those lines? And I think no matter what, one of my first places, at least that I started looking very early on, was just visiting local salvage yards, architectural salvage and also antique salvage yards, to figure out what's available. What sort of things do they have that might appeal? Do they have old doors that match our doors? Do they have old wavy glass available? And for me, around the DC area, we have one called Community Forklift, which isn't just old architectural salvage from antique houses. It's a reuse group that also stocks old items like old wood and old windows and doors. Up in Baltimore, there's one called Second Chance Inc. They're amazing as well. Down in Richmond, there's a couple. One that I like in particular is Caravati's. So it's knowing what's around you geographically as kind of a first step. That'll open your eyes to see what's available.
Now I have to say, oh, I'm sorry. Oops, I interrupted you. I was going to say, as someone who's lived all over the United States, I must say that we are very spoiled here out east. We have our choice in a lot of cities and metropolitan areas of these salvage yards that just don't exist in the Midwest or the West. They're just not there. From certain parts of the country, that stuff goes right into the landfill without even a thought.
I learned about all of this because I grew up outside of Cleveland, and I had a family friend who was a housing developer, and he was building new houses but using materials from old houses.
Oh, that's
so architectural salvage in these new houses. And this is west of Cleveland, and he introduced me to, at the time, this is the early 2000s, Cleveland's really rich architectural salvage scene. That sort of has gone away a little bit. There aren't as many places as there were in the early 2000s. So that's the thing with this is once you find a supplier, that supplier isn't necessarily always going to be around. You need to kind of stay current. And as it evolves based on your area, a lot of places have gone online and made things available online. So speaking of the Midwest, I know there's a handful of architectural salvage places that have great online presences that I've bought from out in like Iowa, for example.
Oh, that's good. Yeah, I did not know that. I do know there, I guess I was going to say eBay. eBay is one of those places where you can, for all over the country, you might find little things, doorknobs, locks, hinges, keys, whatnot.
And actually, I just got an eBay delivery today for 2 3-inch steel Stanley Sweetheart hinges that match the hinges in our house. So and in
your heart too, right?
Yes, definitely match the hinges in my heart. The thing that's interesting about it is that eBay is probably the second stop that I was going to mention. eBay and also Facebook Marketplace. And also something that's kind of started over the last couple of years, Etsy. Etsy has a great resource in terms of architectural salvage because people are putting their antique items up. They're sometimes slightly a little bit more expensive than eBay can be because they're more specialized and people have specific things that they're trying to sell. But I've found several matching rim locks and hinges on Etsy over the last couple of months.
Right. Good point. So if you're out in Idaho or Nevada and you have the one historic house in a town of 500, then you can look online to maybe find that thing. Because that's what happens in those communities is that, the communities themselves become a lot more modern, definitely post-war, but they'll have a couple of houses that are pre-war and people still want to preserve them and rehab them, but they don't have a salvage to go to.
Right. And there's another thing too, mentioning neighborhoods that I wanted to touch on here. Is if you live in an area with several historic homes, be the crazy neighbor. I've found that works really well. When the neighbors all know that you're interested in this sort of thing, if anybody is doing a renovation and getting rid of anything, you'll have those neighbors approach you and say, hey, I've got this thing. Do you want it? Or another neighbor will see a different neighbor throwing something out and rescue it for me and bring it to our backyard and say, hey, did you want this? So you have to be careful that you don't become a junk accumulator in the same process. But it works really well when the neighbors know that you're the person that's interested in this, that you're sometimes their first stop.
Right. That actually reminds me of a funny conversation I was having with Andy the other day. We were walking and I said, we have the nicest neighbors. Like, I love all our neighbors. Isn't it unique that the neighborhood doesn't have it just like one sort of pain in the neck? And then I turned to him and I said, wait, maybe it's us. Like, maybe we are the people that are the pain in the neck.
That's that old saying. If you think nobody's a pain in the neck, maybe you need to look at yourself as the pain in the neck. You're filling the void for everyone. I'm okay with that if it means that I get better hardware out of it.
Right. Exactly.
But there's another big piece to this too that has to do, because we're talking about period appropriate, authentic, salvage, antique, reclaimed, whatever you want to call it. There's also the whole aspect of reproduction, period appropriate reproduction hardware or supplies and materials. Talking about old glass, there are a handful of manufacturers in the country. One's up here in Baltimore that creates wavy glass using today's standards for glass, safety glass, and everything, but it's made with more period appropriate techniques. And finding those types of vendors, whether it's online, Van Dyke's House of Antique Hardware, anything like that, you can sometimes get those hard to find things that you maybe have stalked eBay for a very long time and just aren't coming across, but they have a modern reproduction of it.
Mm-hmm, definitely. And I'll put some of that on the show notes, some of those sources on the show notes. But I ended up getting a handset, a lock and a handset for my giant front door. And I had to get a reproduction because I'd looked and the one that we had just wasn't going to work for a door that weighs about 800 pounds. I don't even know why that was a possibility. But I mean, it had been there for 135 years until we switched it. But I'll tell you, the handset the reproduction handset I got works a lot better.
Yeah.
And it looks beautiful.
Part of this sourcing all of the materials, the reason why I said it's kind of near and dear to my heart with this is that, I'm a very detail-oriented person and I get down to those very specific items to try to bring a house back to where it was before without necessarily making it a 100%, restoration or trying to preserve it exactly how it was. So it's about making sure all of the hardware matches, all of the doors are similar throughout the house, the way it would have been intended, even though the house looks more like a house would today. So a lot of what we end up doing is slowly collecting these things over time. I knew I was going to need at least a dozen rim locks. So I took about 8 to 10 years, I think, finding a dozen matching rim locks. Finally, once I had them all, as we did the rooms, as we restored the doors, they were all ready for me to use because of the work that I did slowly finding it over the years.
One thing I really like too about our old house community is that if you want something, if you just ask someone, we help each other find these things. And I was thinking about how different it is than I was in a prior business and it involved fabrics and sources were really proprietary. And if you wanted a part or something special, then you basically had to wait for someone to slip up with a clue or accidentally, reveal a source altogether. And
absolutely, yeah.
It's frustrating. So I like this. It's kind of a treasure hunt. I mean, I think I still respond more like a detective than a researcher when I'm doing a Google search or I'm paying attention to what somebody else is doing on Instagram or reading blog articles. I'm like, oh, there's a clue. And I think I don't really have to do that anymore. I could just ask.
Yeah. Last week I was working on cutting glass for a sash that I'm restoring and I was short a couple panes and mentioned it in our stories on Instagram. And somebody sent me a message, reached out and said, hey, I've got a storm window that I rescued off the curb. And if you want to come up to our house, they're up in 40 minutes away, come up to our house and pick it up. It's yours if you'd like it. And it was exactly what I needed in order to finish out the couple pieces of missing glass. And this was a case where I just, had zero expectation just mentioning that we're missing this, and people on Instagram reach out because they have things available. And it's exactly what you're talking about. It's this community where people are getting a lot of pride and enjoyment out of connecting people with the things that they're looking for.
Definitely. And something we didn't really touch on, I guess, is, plaster, paints, that kind of thing. But that information is out there too. And I'll put some sources there. But we've talked about things on the podcast like linseed oil paints. We had an entire episode about linseed oil paint.
Yep.
And not period appropriate, but we also had another episode about modern paints and how they can work or be compatible with this type of work. And then you and I just talked about plaster last episode.
With paint, there's also suppliers from outside of your given country, for example. There's a paint company called Earthborn Paints out of the UK that's more appropriate, breathable paints for plaster walls. That's something that people in the United States would likely not know about. But because of Instagram, I'm aware of this, reached out to them, and you can get the supplies here in the United States in order to paint your plaster walls with something that is breathable and appropriate for lime plaster.
Yeah. And both of my floor coverings, Rubio and Loba, are companies that are outside of the United States. I think one's Swedish and one's Belgian or something. But yeah, they're both from outside the United States. So that's right.
Yeah.
All right. So there's really an unlimited amount of source. It's not as hard as we make it out to be, but I do realize that it does feel overwhelming when you're in the beginning stages thinking about having to find replacement parts or supplies.
Definitely. And don't be afraid to ask for help too, even for places that you wouldn't necessarily think about. If you reach out, especially local lumber yards. Local lumber yards are wonderful if you're looking for old wood. They'll a lot of times hook you up with other suppliers that are outside of their specific brick and mortar and get you in touch with somebody else who has something. Maybe a barn is falling down or something like that, and you can get supplies from there. So talk with people around you and they'll help you out.
Great. That's an excellent tip. Well, thank you so much for coming back, Alex.
It was good to be back. And like I said, this is near and dear to my heart, and this is a great topic. The more people know about where to get great stuff for their house, the better for everyone.
I agree. All right. Thanks. I will talk to you soon. I know.
Thank you.
Bye. If you have a DIY or old house question that you would like to submit for listener Q&A, please send it via the contact form at truetalesfromoldhouses.com or via social media, and we'll answer it in an upcoming episode. Now it's my turn to ask you something, and that is, what is your favorite thing about living in an old house, or what's the most challenging thing about living in an old house? And I've been asking these same questions all season, and here are some of your answers. Sally from the Instagram account @QuaintQueenAnne wrote, "There's a soul to old houses that I think only old house people understand." And Beth sent me this message. "My house isn't old to many, but I love my plaster walls and cove ceilings." I think 1950s qualifies, Beth. If 1970s qualifies now, 1950s certainly does. As for the challenges of living in an old home, over on Instagram, Beauty on Bryant has a common concern. Less than a year into home ownership, she's finding it difficult to get started and to determine what to prioritize. Alex and I just talked about how overwhelming it can be to find supplies in the beginning, but project paralysis in those early years, it's a real issue too. It definitely gets better as you get settled, so hang in there, one small project at a time. I would love to hear your answers to these questions all season, so please visit the True Tales from Old Houses website. On the bottom right-hand side, you'll see a microphone icon. Click on that microphone and you can leave your answer as a voicemail. And you're also always welcome to send me a message on Instagram or Facebook. So again, this season's question is, what is your favorite thing about living in an old house, or what is the most challenging thing about living in an old house? Thank you to Sally, Beth, and Beauty on Bryant for taking the time to answer. I want to take a couple of minutes to express some gratitude for our sponsors. True Tales from Old Houses is supported by the Window Course from Scott Seidler of the Craftsman blog and the Plunger app. The Window Course is a step-by-step do-it-yourself program that will teach you everything you need to know to successfully restore your wood windows. It's self-paced, so you can go as fast or as slow as you need to, and there are several price points to fit your needs and budget. Now, we're all trying to stay ahead of the winter weather right now, whatever that means in your area. But out of necessity, some of us, like me, have to work on windows indoors all year round or will never get finished. And even if you've decided to hold off until spring, now is the perfect time to take the course and learn the process. Make a plan, gather supplies, and you can hit the ground running when the weather turns warm. If you sign up for the Lifetime Access Package or Training Package, then you'll also get a free infrared paint remover, which is a $130 value. The window course is offered with a money-back guarantee, and now it comes with an infrared paint remover too. That's $130 right back in your pocket. I've still got a coupon code for you too. Scott is offering True Tales from Old Houses listeners a special discount. For 10% off, visit thewindowcourse.com and use the coupon code True Tales. True Tales from Old Houses is also supported by the Plunger app, whose mission is to solve 100% of plumbing problems that don't require an on-site plumber. The Plunger app is free to download. Open the app on your phone or tablet, click Talk to a Plumber Now, and you'll be connected with a licensed plumber in your area who will help you troubleshoot and solve your plumbing problem with a face-to-face video chat. You know, I am pretty fearless when it comes to DIY, but plumbing feels high stakes. And when something goes wrong in your plumbing, it's always such a disaster. And having instant access to a plumber makes all the difference. A pro at Plunger helped me install a kitchen faucet and garbage disposal, as well as a toilet in the upstairs bathroom. Plunger can even ship all the parts you'll need right to your front door. Plunger truly is plumbing for the people. And here's what you need to know. Download the free Plunger app at plunjr.com/download. Tap Talk to a Plumber Now to solve your problem. Put those little plumbing issues back on your to-do list because you can do this. And if you mention the True Tales from Old Houses secret word flapper, your first call is only $10. Use the secret word flapper to save and be sure to tell them that I sent you. Just a quick heads up. The next segment was recorded right after Blake Hill House was struck by lightning, which fried the cable line and all of our internet hardware. So there are a few sound bobbles here and there as we worked with substitute technology. Thanks for hanging in there with us. My guest today is Leisa Collins. After a pivotal experience in her native New Zealand, Leisa returned home to Michigan and made it her mission to create original paintings of homes that inspired her in all 50 states, immortalizing the beauty, diverse landscape, and history of each location. Her book, Hand-Painted Homes, An Artist's Pen and Watercolor Journey Across America, was published this year.
So my name is Leisa Collins. I am an artist and I specialize in architectural art. I love and have a passion for homes, historic buildings, and I'm also an author. I just published a coffee table book, which includes 300 pages and 650 images of paintings of my homes in every state.
Welcome, Leisa.
Thank you very much.
It's so nice to have you here. And I want to say that I am still getting lost in your book and poring over the images and stories. It is so thoughtful, and it's such a beautiful tribute to old houses and buildings.
I appreciate that.
Thank you for sending me the copy. I feel like the luckiest person here.
Well, if you're giving me that compliment, I know it's coming from someone who really knows, loves homes as much as I do.
Absolutely. Well, let's just get right to it, because the reason that you started this pen and watercolor journey, you outlined that in your book, but I would love to have you retell your reasons here.
Sure. Well, as I mentioned, my husband and I have loved travel, and we thought, and I love homes, historic buildings, and I relaunched my art career exactly 11 years ago. And I started accumulating series of paintings of cities and then going from state to state. But at the same time, making my living, because this is what I do. Because I do all these paintings of homes, so that, of course, I have a ready-made audience, and the owners want to buy painting of their own home. So as I cruised around the United States, it was sort of quite an adventure. And then suddenly I decided one day, okay, I'm going to do all 50 states. I'm going to do paintings of homes, historic buildings in every state across America. No one's ever done that. And what a great goal, right?
Sure.
But I tell you, there was a moment where I decided I had to do something more than that. And I had to put a book together because it's a lot of work, as you can imagine. And it was, believe it or not, I went back home to New Zealand, where I'm from, to Auckland. This was going to be a very sentimental journey. I was retracing my steps as an artist when I first started my art, because I went off and did many other things before I came back to relaunch my career here in the US. And I went to see this beautiful Victorian home. All my friends lived there. It was really like a bit of an artist colony. And I had my first exhibition there, and I just couldn't wait to go and see it. And instead of this beautiful Victorian in a enclave of historic buildings nestled in, the inner city of Auckland, New Zealand, instead of that building, there was this horrendous space-like circular building that towered upwards. It was the ugliest thing I'd ever seen. All I had was this little sketch, right, of that I'd done, which I used for my invitation of this building. And I looked at it, I thought, I have the number wrong. No, I looked at this horrendous, the mothership just landed looking thing. And I couldn't believe that they could have got away with that. There was like torn down this gorgeous, one of the oldest historic buildings in that area. And I thought, that's it. I'm going back. I see this all the time in America. I know that hundreds of historic buildings are torn down every week, whether it's from decay or demolition, but we lose them every single week in America. So I decided I have to do something more. I have to take all I've got. This was couple of years ago. I have to put paintings together every state, and then I'm going to put a book together that's going to promote the need to save these buildings and really show the legacy of the beauty and history of the homes that exist in every single state across America.
I'm so sad about the Victorian home, and yet it sort of changed your goal, which is a beautiful thing.
Yeah. It was just, I couldn't believe it. I just stood there. And I asked some people on the street, like, what happened to that building? They looked at me blankly, and there was no record. I looked in the historic preservation, nothing. And it was this beautiful, gorgeous building just disappeared from the face of the earth, never to be seen again.
That's just tragic. It is really hard to believe that they would just tear an entire building down. And not only that, erect something unattractive in its place, I guess arguably unattractive, but also that nobody around would even know what you were talking about. It's as if it never happened.
Yeah, and it just didn't fit at all. This large circular building, just a tube, it didn't fit at all with the rest of the surroundings, which were historic buildings.
Well, it sounds like it changed the purpose, perhaps, of your American trip across the country to immortalize these buildings in art. And thank you. I guess thank you again for doing that. It gives us a chance to see your book and understand your purpose behind it. So for this trip, once you decided you wanted to do it, how much planning did you do? Did you take this trip all at once? How did this actually work? Just the nuts and bolts of it.
Well, I already had the goal, about 5 years ago to do paintings, historic buildings in every state. So I was journeying across. We've lived in all regions of the United States. We love moving. We are interested in culture and diversity. And so in most states, I already had a series. It was after that incident when I went back home, and I thought, well, this is what's happening in America. This is what I see in every state. This is it's terrible. I've done paintings of homes, they're in my book, that are no longer there. And we're not talking just old, decayed structures. These are beautiful, sound, historic homes, Tudors, craftsmen, and you name it, Victorians, that had just been ripped down for the sake of economics. It's all about the mighty dollar. So it was at that point I decided, okay, ironically, the pandemic had just hit. Before I was on the last plane out of Australia.
Oh, goodness.
The last plane that you didn't wear masks and there weren't restrictions. And I made it back to Michigan, and I thought, this is a great time. That's it. I'm putting this book together. Now's the perfect time. That's when it started. So that was last May, and it took a few months, because I did all the writing, researching, and all that sort of thing, and then putting all the images together and laying it out. And I had an editor as well and a designer. And so that was all done by October.
You actually made the most of your pandemic. The rest of us are like, well, we made some sourdough bread, maybe some banana bread.
Well, yeah, I did. And not only that, I kept my business in terms of I get commissions every week from all around the country of paintings, because now, of course, word of mouth spreads, So they just come in every week, and I still kept getting these. It didn't change. I didn't miss a beat. So I was doing all my normal work and doing the writing at the same time.
Right. Oh, that's incredible. How did you decide what to draw and what to paint? What caught your eye? Were you automatically commissioned by these folks, or did you just paint things that you fell in love with and thought were beautiful?
Oh, well, yeah, let me clarify. I do get commissions all the time, but I always love choosing my own subject. So that will never change. So as I moved around state by state, city by city, I would always do research. I always love to know the history and how it formed and who was behind it and all that sort of interesting, fascinating stuff. So then I would choose buildings and homes that really were part of that history. Not only that, I made a point of creating an eclectic mix of homes that represent a various city, like Chicago. You've got the row houses, you've got the older Tudors, you've got the mid-century modern, Frank Lloyd Wright. I have a painting of a home. So, if I was to think Chicago, you would see a whole array of the styles that are prevalent in that area. So I would choose, and I still do that. I just started a series on Denver. And so I'll never not do that, as well as getting my commissions.
During your travels, did any architectural patterns emerge? We're talking about regional differences. So interesting.
Oh, yeah. That was what was fascinating. My first studio was in Old Town Alexandria, Virginia. So you've got that history, Annapolis in Maryland. And I did series of paintings in all that region. And so that was fascinating. Georgetown. So you see the Federal, the Georgian, and then the older ones, the Victorians. And I became a walking expert. And then when you went across the country, that was also fascinating, all the way over to New Mexico and Arizona. So, of course, you got the Adobe and the Spanish revival influence. And then we also spent a lot of time in California, in sort of LA area, Pasadena. So you got Bungalow Heaven, amazing. The Monterey, which was devised right there. In fact, California was a huge creation point for many of these architectural styles that were released right there at various fairs and so forth. So I would see definite patterns. See, the funny thing is, no matter what city or what area, you'll still find all the various styles, but it's just, you'll find many, many more in one area, like Spanish revivals and craftsmen, and then Tudors. And yeah, that was part of the fun for me, like really seeing how the landscape changed along with the architecture. And they all gel together.
I live in New York now, but I moved from California, so I'm quite familiar with all the different styles of architecture. I feel like a lot of people went out to California to experiment. They took their money out to California to build something fancy and try something new.
Exactly. I totally know what you mean. It was sort of like a creative oasis, wasn't it? The climate's beautiful. And so there is a lot of wonderful architecture for study right there. As I moved across the country, that's why I did it state by state by state, alphabetically, because I also did sketches and watercolor paintings of iconic buildings in each state and within the landscape. So those are incorporated into every state as well as I did a sketch of the oldest structure in every state. So as you flip through the pages, I tried to create a sense where you feel like you're actually enjoying that journey as well. That's what I was trying to do.
Well, you were successful because it's
good.
Hours and hours worth of education and entertainment. And I've done several passes through the book. The first is just to kind of get your overall bearings of how the book is laid out because it's so visually pleasing. And then you start to get into it and read the little bit of history. And then it's very clear just how much thought you put into putting this book together from a historical standpoint and also an artistic standpoint. And I really appreciate that. I mean, I've been through it 3 times and I'm going to be going through it more.
That's awesome.
There is a quality about it that draws you in, and you're always looking just a little bit closer to see another detail that you missed or another little bit of information that you missed. So I'm curious, did your perception of what qualified as a beautiful old house that was worthy through immortalizing through art, did that change? Like the more you painted, the more you saw?
No, not really. That never changed because, what I really respect and what I tried, again, I know I repeated this in the book time and time. I featured homeowners, heroes, who'd taken old wrecks and turned them into something beautiful, brought them back to life. And as I said in my introduction, I found as I went along, more and more, I realized that the homeowner is the hero of the historic preservation movement in this country. Yes, it's always a co-effort, isn't it, when you're saving a building or a major or a community? But on the whole, it's the homeowner that takes these homes and brings them into being again and takes off all the crap that had been accumulated, right? And changes stuff and brings them back. And so I feature a lot of those stories in my book, and they shared that information with me in photos before and afters and all that sort of thing. So, and I can tell just by looking at a home if it's well loved. You see, it's that love. It's that all those special little things on the porch, the way they've decorated it, the colors and the thought that went into it, and the landscaping. It's the love and passion that they have for this structure, and it's their home. It's where all their family memories are held. So I saw that from the beginning. That's always what enticed me to want to do these paintings, because each home has a personality and it follows along with the people who live there, right? And so that's what makes it fascinating. That's why I love architecture. It's about people.
We talk a lot about on this show and on my social media account, where I spend a lot of time too, about home ownership as one piece of a story. You know, these houses are so old that they tell many, many stories because they've had 5, 10, or more owners, and that our time in them is just a little piece of the story. And we take on these projects and do our best to tell our little bit of the story in the most respectful and kind way to the building, for sure.
Yes, absolutely.
All right. So, of course, I love high-style houses. Many of us are conditioned to notice and appreciate the high-style, fancy houses from history. But there are these, as you've mentioned before in our correspondence before, you said there are these great examples of adaptability and resilience. And these are in the more modest homes of the early settlers, and even farther back, the indigenous people. And you created art. I guess, is it a painting? Is it a drawing? I feel like I should know this. Are they paintings or are they drawings?
You see, it's called a pen and watercolor. That's the technique. First, I do a very detailed ink pen drawing, and then I do the watercolor painting on top of it. When you look at the book, you'll see all the little lines, and it's all that detail that I can put into every painting. That's what I love. That's what gives it its personality. And then you add the color and vibrance.
So let's talk about some of those paintings that you did, most of them out west.
Yes, absolutely. Well, one that I was such a wonderful experience. I went out there, and that was the Acomo Pueblo. It's often called the ancient sky city. You see, we tend to associate historic preservation with European structures. But if you look back, the Acomo Pueblo tribe of New Mexico, they lived on a 365-foot mesa plateau in a tribal settlement, if you can imagine that. And these were handcrafted adobe dwellings. And that's what I depicted in my painting of this area. And they use natural resources, of course. What I thought was fascinating is that the Acomo people have occupied the same area for more than 1,200 years. They're still there. The people still live there. The tribal people still live there. So it's the oldest continuously inhabited community in the United States. Isn't that incredible? And I was just going to add to that I was so fascinated by this, and also the work of one particular person within the tribal sort of organization. It's called the Acomo Pueblo's Historic Preservation Office. Well, she has been a tireless advocate, and she got it registered on the historic register. So it's actually protected. It was the first Native American structure or whole area site of that nature to be registered. And I think that was an amazing thing. I actually presented it with my Historic Preservation Award.
Oh, that's wonderful. And I'll link that in the show notes. What was the Historic Society again? Could you repeat that again?
Sure. Her office is the Acomo Pueblo Historic Preservation Office, and it's part of Acomo Pueblo Nation, which is in New Mexico. It's a National Historic Monument, and it's about 60 miles west of Albuquerque.
I love travel too, so I keep a list of places that I want to go. And it's funny because when you write them down, It's amazing how many you actually get to. I'll go back and I'll think, wow, I went there. I said I wanted to go there and I went there. So
Exactly. You're so right. Yeah.
Now in South Dakota, you found a sod house. And so many of us, I can't say most, but a lot of girls in my age range remember sod houses from the Laura Ingalls Wilder books because that family moved out and they built a sod house. But tell us more about that structure.
Sure. So in South Dakota, finding wood was a hard proposition. It was very scarce on the plains, and you can't exactly lug rocks and stuff, which is miles and miles away. They had no resources. So what they did, which I think was fascinating, is they built sod dugout homes. So I went to one that was built in 1909. It's the last remaining sod dugout home that actually exists. And it's now part of the Badlands National Park, and it's historically protected. So you can visit it. It's known as the Prairie Homestead, and it's one of the only original sod homes that is even intact today. So what they used was cottonwood trees, and they used those for their beams, and they plowed the buffalo grass sod, and that served for the upper walls. They made their walls. So it was cool in the summer and warm in the winter. They built an outhouse. This was the one particular house I went to by Edgar and Alice Brown. They were the owners. So it had an outhouse, a chicken coop, a barn, a cellar, and even inside, they decorated it in the same way it was back then, a little table. And it's like the ground is above you. And it's like, anyone who's seen Lord of the Rings, it's like a little hobbit house.
Right.
I've been there too, right?
That's true.
They built a whole hobbit village in New Zealand. And it's, but these guys were doing it long before I guess the hobbits did it first.
Yeah.
I didn't think of that.
They have been around for an awfully long time.
Yeah, maybe that's where they got the idea. But it was really cool. And so, but in those days, that's how that was their structure. So I have to think the resilience, if you take yourself back and you imagine, you've got a family, they had children. I'm so impressed and can you imagine how cold it is on the plains in South Dakota?
I don't think I want to.
Oh my goodness.
Well, what I thought of as you were telling me that, and this is nature related, but cottonwood trees, if anybody's familiar or not familiar with cottonwood trees, they use a huge amount of water. So almost all the time, they are located on the shores of a river or something like that because they have to have so much water. But the wood itself is also very wet. So I can't imagine that, let's say they came across a bunch of cottonwood trees, that they would make very good trees to build a house with. And I have not been to the Badlands, but there must be a water source within wagon or walking distance. And that's probably where they found those trees. So it's really interesting that they made the most of their natural resources.
That's a very good point. I didn't realize that about cottonwood trees.
They're interesting. They're great trees when there's an abundance of water, and they are really hard trees to have when in drought, which we found a lot in California because they need so much water that when you're in a drought situation, they just suck up all the river water. They'll even steal your well water, if you have a cottonwood tree that's located near a well. So very interesting.
Yeah.
Most of my life, I've lived out west. So drought has been a part of my life more so than my life of abundant water here in New York, where sometimes it feels like it will never stop raining. But I'm very familiar with out west.
Right. Yeah.
Well, let's switch topics a little bit. And you and I have a local connection, which is the Roycroft Campus. And honestly, I could do a whole episode centered on the Roycroft Campus, and I actually hope to do that in the future. And I just want to briefly explain to my listeners what that is. The Roycroft Campus was founded in 1895 by Elbert Hubbard, who was a writer, publisher, artist, and philosopher. And the Roycroft Campus itself served as an artist and craftsperson community, and it directly related to the, of course, arts and crafts movement of the time. And I'm not going to give it all away just yet, because I really do hope to do an episode about that. But there was some drama. Would you agree that there's some drama there?
Yeah.
And now the entire facility is managed and owned by several different entities, but a great deal of historic preservation and education still occurs there today. And I wondered, how did you find the Roycroft campus? What drew you there? And your painting is beautiful. There's a painting in the book. New York is such a huge state. So I love how you dedicated a part to New York City, and then you didn't forget about the rest of us in upstate and Western New York.
Oh, good.
Thank you.
That's right. There was the print shop. I did the stone print shop that's in the book, and also the chapel, the Roycroft Chapel. My husband and I actually stayed at the Roycroft Inn, right? That was built way back in the 20s, I believe. And then it went through it was dormant for a while. And now it reopened about, 15 years ago or something like that. They totally restored it and they put it back to exactly how it was. So we stayed there on a cold winter's night. With the fires roaring and these beautiful tapestries on the walls. And it was just the most amazing experience, you know what I mean? And a beautiful hotel too, and great service and all that. And we had breakfast and the hot mulled wine, and it was really cool. But the other thing I wanted to add is that I was attracted there because I've always loved the craftsman movement. And I think it's not just, as you know, it's not just about an architectural style. It's also a whole lifestyle. They were upset. They wanted to get back to the roots of life, to have an outdoor, indoor, to have porches and more open floor plans and more handcrafted, didn't they?
Yes.
That was the whole craftsman movement. And Albert Hubbard and others were part of that. And so I thought, well, it'd be so nice to trace the roots of that. And also, it's as an artist guild, I've always thought the whole concept of an artist guild is so amazing. And they had a number of those around the United States. But the Roycroft campus is actually, I believe it's one of the only standing guilds of its kind, isn't it, in the nation?
I think you're right. Yeah, there are a few spread out across the United States, but it's a pretty special treasure that's still intact at this point.
Yes. And not only that, there were 14 structures as part of the overall complex, and 9 of those exist. That's pretty good. So you can wander around the print shop. There's a little gift store too. You go to the chapel. There's just all these other buildings, and they've opened it up as a live museum. So that's another place I would totally recommend people to go, because back in the day, they formed this community of printers, furniture makers, metalsmiths, leathersmiths, bookbinders. They were just making these beautiful pieces of art and then sending them out. And that's how they made their money. And then they had gardens, and they had a whole lifestyle, and they had the chapel, and so there was a very and whole families congregated there of artists. I think what an amazing experience that would have been, And so I wanted to see what it was like and see for myself.
Well, it would be fun to have you back, because I could show you some other related architecture and buildings that are a little bit off the beaten path, that aren't on the campus, but are there because of the campus. So there's it's now an apartment building, but it used to be the big house where all the women who worked at they were segregated by gender, so they had the women's housing. And there's a lot of more interesting buildings here, and little behind the scenes stuff that would be fun to show you for sure.
I'd love to see that. No, I didn't know that, because we just sort of wandered on our own. But yeah, that sounds incredible. Yeah.
Well, the Roycroft campus too, it is owned by several different entities. And so the hotel is owned and managed by a different company than the print shop, and even the other buildings that have antiques, and the church is a separate building, the chapel. And but it's neat. They're constantly doing, because they are historic buildings, they do general surveys anytime they want to fix the buildings or update or anything. So I've had an opportunity to visit an archaeological dig that they did as part of the survey.
Really?
And
wow,
yeah,
how cool.
It's been really neat. It's interesting to have that as such a deeply ingrained part of this town's history. But enough about me.
No, that's fascinating. I love that.
Did you have a favorite? Do you have a favorite state or city or building? And it's such a basic question, but after reading the book, I'm like, I have to ask it. I have to ask.
Well, it's so funny because, of course, everyone asks that. And, I'd be traveling around and I just fall in love with this area and the beautiful lakes and the drives and the covered bridges. Oh, this is my favorite state. And then next thing, Oh no, this is my favorite. And I would keep moving, and Florida has its own, beauty, and then California and Northern California and Oregon. I love the Oregon coast, right? Because that reminds me of New Zealand. It's very much like
Oh,
New Zealand.
interesting.
And the Badlands, and you're moving across, but New York is so fascinating. Upstate New York is unbelievable.
Yeah, people don't know it. We're a hidden treasure.
No, I know they don't. It's not just New York City. It's like it's a treasure, and then you go to Virginia. That's incredible. Like the history, the buildings, the structures, and Washington D.C. So I'm sorry to say I can't really give you a definitive one that would be my favorite. I think, and I think if I hadn't been to every single state and hadn't seen for myself and really got to love each state and for what it is, and the architecture and its history, and doing all the research I've done, I'd probably say, yeah, I would say that that's my favorite. But because now I've done the research and looked into it and included all that in my book, no, it's just too much of a composite. And, it's just, I couldn't just say one state is my favorite.
That's okay. Your answer pleases me. I think we're kindred spirits in that. I've lived all over the United States. I've traveled all over the United States, sort of. Yeah.
Cool.
So we have a lot in common there. And I would never have been able to answer that question either. It's a bit of an unfair question, in fact, but I just thought, yeah, why not? I'm going to ask it anyway. After doing this, is there a part 2 of this book in the future? Are you already planning something new and different that would complement it or add to it?
Well, what I'm thinking of doing is adding to it. Right now, I need to sell what I produce, right? So I did get a little ambitious in how many I printed, and so now it's a matter of and once people see the book, they're like, oh, absolutely, they love it. But it's a competitive world, coffee table books and books as a whole. So I'm working a little bit on that and promoting it. But I do think it would be fascinating to have separate books on various cities where I've done over 100 paintings of homes that I love, that I've lived in many of them, like in Pasadena, in the whole greater Los Angeles area, like Chicago, I could say that, and Washington, D.C., and we've lived in Florida, we've lived in St. Louis, Missouri. And so where I have large collections and they have fascinating history. So I think smaller books that relate to a state or particularly to cities would be really interesting. But that takes a lot of gathering too, and you need individuals, homeowners,
Right.
stories of individuals and what they did with their house. And that's what's fascinating. People love stories. Just to fully answer your question, I want to put a coloring books together.
Oh, very neat.
And educate people about what these styles are. Because I think the more educated people are about history, about historic structures, about architectural, historic designs and styles of homes, I think the less inclined they will be to just want to tear things down. So I think it's an education process, isn't it?
I agree with you. I agree. It's the creative's dilemma to some degree. You have so many ideas and we just don't have enough time to make them all happen, right?
Totally.
So let's wrap up by spending a couple minutes talking about where people can find your book. I mean, how can they find your art? How can they find you? How can they buy this book?
Well, that's pretty easy. Just go Google Leisa Collins, and Leisa is Leisa, Leisa Collins art, and you'll see 2 or 3, 4 pages of my stuff. You'll see my website. You can buy the book. It's right there. Newsflash, my book. You can go to my art store and get my book. You can go to Amazon. It's called Hand Painted Homes, an Artist's Pen and Water Journey Across America. It's on Goodreads, and I always welcome any communication from people. If they've got questions, they can always email me. They can even call me. I even answer the phone.
Excellent.
Yeah.
I'll be sure and post your phone number on the show notes. No, just kidding.
I know, but it's funny, isn't it? Today, people text you to see if they can call you. I'm like, why don't you just call and see if I'm around? You know what I mean? It's
yeah, that's funny.
I'm used to a phone as a phone. A phone is what you talk in, just call.
Right. That is very funny. Okay. So I'm going to link all of this on the show notes at truetalesfromoldhouses.com, just in case people need another central location to find you, find your art, find your book. But real quickly, again, tell us, what is the name of your book, just in case it cut out or something. I want to make sure I hear this very clearly.
Yes, hand-painted homes, an artist's pen and watercolor journey across America.
Well, as I said in the beginning, your book, Hand Painted Homes, it's thoughtful and it's beautiful. And thank you for preserving these treasures through your art. And thank you for being here with me today, too.
Well, thank you very much for having me and for the work you're doing to push this message. I think it's very, very important.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Leisa. Thank you for listening to True Tales from Old Houses, and thank you to my guests, Alex from Old Town Home and Leisa Collins. She's offering a coupon code for her lovely book, and I've put all of that information on the show notes. To continue the conversation, be sure to follow True Tales from Old Houses and Blake Hill House on Facebook and Instagram. And if you enjoy this show, please consider rating or reviewing it on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to your favorites. For more information, including photos, everything we talked about today, and to request a transcript, please visit truetalesfromoldhouses.com. Until next time.